She stood perfectly still in her faded, soil-stained gardening cardigan, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the home she had built from the ground up 40 years ago. Chloe kicked a pair of worn gardening shears toward the door, her high heel clicking sharply. "Grab your trash. I've already called the locksmith to ensure you don't try to crawl back in." But Chloe had no idea what was inside the manila envelope Martha was clutching. The heavy black garbage bag hit the imported hardwood floor with a disrespectful, sickening thud. Dirt and crushed rose petals spilled across the pristine foyer. "I called the state facility, Martha," Chloe sneered, wiping an imaginary speck of dust from her silk designer dress. "The transport van will be here in 20 minutes. It's time you stopped leeching off my husband." Martha did not weep. She didn't drop to her knees to beg.
Wrong move. She just threw away the foundation of her own lavish lifestyle. Let's get into it.
The heavy black garbage bag hit the imported hardwood floor. The thud was disrespectful, sickening, and final. Dirt spilled across the pristine foyer. Crushed rose petals followed. They scattered silent and still. Chloe stood over them. She was composed, deliberate, utterly unmoved. She reached down and wiped an imaginary speck of dust from her silk designer dress. The gesture was slow, theatrical, and deeply contemptuous. "I called the state facility, Martha," she said. She let the words settle. "The transport van will be here in 20 minutes. Martha did not move. She stood near the hallway arch, her faded gardening cardigan catching the afternoon light. The cardigan was old, soil-stained, and worn soft at the elbows. She had worn it for 40 years. She would not apologize for that. Chloe moved to the hall closet. She yanked it open. She grabbed another black bag from the roll on the top shelf. The plastic crackled sharp and cheap against her manicured fingers. She shook the bag open with a single violent snap. "You've been leeching off my husband long enough," Chloe said. She pulled a stack of folded linen from the shelf. She dropped it into the bag. She didn't fold it back. She didn't look up. "This is his house. His name is on the deed, not yours." Martha watched. She held the manila envelope against her chest. It was dirt-smudged, sealed with a heavy wrought iron wax stamp, and she had not released it once. Not when Chloe had arrived. Not when the first bag had hit the floor. Not now. The closet was emptied in minutes. Chloe moved to the sitting room. She swept a row of framed photographs from the bookshelf with one arm. Glass cracked against glass. The frames tumbled, tangled, and broken into the open bag. Martha recognized each one. A photograph of the house being framed. A photograph of her son at 7 standing in the rose garden with mud on his boots. A photograph of her late husband at the kitchen table laughing at something just outside the frame. Gone into the bag without ceremony. Chloe tied the top of the bag with 2 hard knots. She dragged it to the foyer. The plastic squealed against the hard wood. She grabbed a fresh bag and returned to the sitting room without pausing. "You keep staring at me like I'm supposed to feel something," Chloe called from the hallway. Her voice was bright, almost cheerful, and completely without warmth. "I don't. This has been overdue for a very long time, Martha." Martha said nothing. She shifted the envelope slightly in her hands. The smell hit next. Sharp, sterile, and suffocating. Chloe had retrieved a bottle of chemical bleach from beneath the kitchen sink. She poured a measure into a bucket and began swabbing the foyer tiles where the rose petals had fallen. The scent of the crushed heirloom roses had been there first. Rich, layered, and deeply earthy, it was the scent of the garden Martha had planted the year the house was built. The bleach erased it in seconds. Martha looked down at the petals. They were already browning against the wet tile. Chloe noticed. She wrung out the mop with both hands and looked directly at Martha. "Sentimental," she said. She let the word hang. "That's your problem. You attach yourself to things that don't belong to you anymore." The bag in the sitting room was full. Chloe dragged it to the foyer and lined it beside the first. She straightened up and surveyed the room with the calm, proprietary satisfaction of someone who believed completely that all of this was already hers. Martha watched her hands. The nails were pristine-shaped and polished to a pale shell color. Not a crack, not a chip, not a trace of anything earned the hard way. Martha looked down at her own hands. The knuckles were wide and weathered. The nails were short-rimmed faintly with garden soil that no amount of washing had fully removed. She had planted the roses this morning. She had been on her knees in the east bed before the sun cleared the tree line. Chloe retrieved a third bag. She moved to the bedroom hallway. "You won't need much," she called back. "The facility provides everything, sheets, meals, a schedule." She paused at the doorway. "Honestly, it might suit you. Routine, supervision, people to check that you haven't wandered off." Martha turned the envelope over once in her hands, the wax seal pressed into her thumb. It was intact, firm, and cold. The bleach smell intensified. It rose from the wet tiles and spread through the foyer in a slow chemical wave. Martha breathed through it. She had been breathing through worse for longer than Chloe had been alive. The third bag filled quickly. Chloe worked without hesitation. She moved through the bedroom, the bathroom, the small study at the end of the hall. Each room emptied in the same way. Objects lifted, dropped, bagged. No consideration, no pause. Martha remained in the foyer. She did not sit. She did not pace. She stood still and straight with the envelope held flat against her chest. By the time Chloe returned with the third bag, 4 more had joined the line. 7 black bags, bulging, knotted, and cheap, were now arranged across the foyer floor. They looked wrong against the imported hardwood. Disposable, temporary, and small. Chloe surveyed them with satisfaction. "That's most of it," she said. She pulled off a rubber glove with a sharp snap. "Someone will come for the rest." She moved to the front door and opened it wide. The afternoon heat pressed in immediately. "You can wait on the porch." Martha looked at her. Chloe gestured toward the door. The gesture was small, controlled, and final. Martha moved. She carried the envelope in both hands. She crossed the foyer past the scattered rose petals still drying at the tile edge and stepped through the open door. Behind her, Chloe began dragging the first bag toward the entrance. Martha stopped on the porch. She looked out at the garden. The east rose bed was freshly turned. The canes were upright, pruned back for the season, tied carefully to their stakes with strips of soft cloth. She had done that this morning. She had known even then that today would come. The dirt on her hands was not from the garden alone. It was from the small steel box she had buried beneath the oldest rose cane at first light. The box had held one document. That document was now sealed inside the envelope she was holding. Chloe kicked the gardening shears out the front door. They skittered across the porch and came to rest near Martha's feet. "Grab your trash," Chloe said. She didn't look at her. "The locksmith is already on his way." Martha looked down at the shears. They were old, worn at the handles, and still sharp. She did not pick them up yet. She looked back at the garden. The dirt on her hands wasn't from planting. It was from retrieving. And what she had retrieved was far more dangerous than anything Chloe had thought to throw away. Martha stood on the porch. The afternoon sun hit the concrete directly flat and without mercy. The heat pressed down on her shoulders like a physical weight. Her cardigan held it layer by layer, and she did not remove it. Chloe appeared in the doorway. She had changed nothing about her posture. She was still composed, still satisfied, still entirely certain of the outcome. She leaned one shoulder against the doorframe and crossed her arms. "You're still standing there," she said. It was not a question. "I am," Martha said. Her voice was quiet, not small. There is a difference, and Chloe had never learned to hear it. Martha turned to face her. She held the envelope at her side, now flat against her thigh, the wax seal pressed against her palm. She looked at Chloe steadily, without anger, without pleading, and without any of the collapse Chloe had clearly expected. "I want to make sure you understand something," Martha said, "before the locksmith arrives." Chloe tilted her head. The diamonds on her smartwatch caught the light. They fractured it into small, bright pieces across the porch ceiling. Martha's own watch ticked against her wrist, steady and unbothered. The leather strap was cracked at the buckle. The face was scratched. It had never once lost a minute in 31 years. "By all means," Chloe said. She smiled. It was the smile of someone performing patience they did not actually possess. "Go ahead." Martha nodded once. "The property exists inside an irrevocable trust," she said. "It has since 1987. The home, the land, and all structures on it are trust assets. They are not marital assets. They were never marital assets." She paused. "Your husband did not inherit this house. He was named a conditional beneficiary. There is a considerable difference." Chloe blinked. Once, slowly. "Martha." Her tone dropped into something softer, more deliberate, and far more condescending. "Sweetheart, David gave me full power of attorney. That covers residential decisions. It covers asset management. It covers everything that concerns this household." "Power of attorney operates within the law," Martha said. "It does not override a trust instrument, particularly not an irrevocable one." Chloe unfolded her arms. She reached into the small silk clutch she had set on the entry table and produced a folded document. She held it up between two fingers, unhurried and certain. "Signed," she said. "Notarized, filed with the county clerk's office 11 days ago." She set it back down. "I've done my homework, Martha. David and I both have." Martha looked at the document without moving toward it. "Clause 4B, she said. Chloe paused. "I'm sorry, Clause 4B, Martha repeated. Her voice remained level, measured, and completely without strain. "Of the irrevocable trust agreement. I want to make certain you are aware of it, not because I expect you to understand it immediately, but because I want it on record that I told you." Chloe stared at her for a moment, then she exhaled through her nose. The sound was short, dismissive, and just barely polite. "You're rambling," she said. She turned back toward the interior of the house. "The facility will have people trained to manage this kind of confusion. It will be much better for everyone." "Clause 4B, Martha said again. "Calm, quiet, and precise. Mandates immediate forfeiture of all derivative benefits upon documented elder harassment. That includes residential rights, financial access, any and all assets that pass through the trust to secondary beneficiaries." Chloe stopped walking. She did not turn around immediately. She stood in the doorway with her back to Martha. The silk of her dress caught the breeze from inside, rippling faintly at the hem. Then she turned. Her expression had shifted. Not much. Barely anything. But Martha noticed. "You know what your problem is?" Chloe said. Her voice was still controlled, still bright, but something underneath it had gone tight. "You have spent 40 years telling everyone in this family what belongs to whom, what the rules are, who owes what to who." She stepped forward onto the porch. "David is done. I am done. This is our life now, and you are not part of it." Martha did not step back. "Clause 4B, she said one final time. "Remember that you heard it from me first." Chloe looked at her for a long moment. Then she laughed. It was short-clipped and genuinely amused. The amusement was real. That was the part that was difficult to watch, the absolute certainty of someone who had never once been wrong in a way that cost them anything. "Go sit down, Martha," she said. She gestured toward the porch step. "The van will be here soon. Try to stay in the shade." She went back inside. The door did not close behind her. It stayed open wide and deliberate. An open door that was not an invitation. A door left open to make clear that the person outside had no right to walk through it. Martha stood in the full sun. The concrete radiated heat upward through the thin soles of her gardening shoes. The leather strap of her watch pressed into her wrist, steady and warm. She looked down at it. The second hand swept its quiet, consistent arc. She had set this watch the morning she signed the trust documents. She had wound it herself. She had kept it running every day since. Not because she needed to know the time, because some things are worth maintaining. The smartwatch on Chloe's wrist tracked her steps, her sleep, her heart rate, and the market value of 4 different currency indexes. It had cost more than Martha's first car. It would be worthless by next year. Martha looked out at the driveway. The street beyond was quiet residential and shaded by the old elms she had planted along the property line in 1991. They were tall now, steady and deep-rooted. They had outlasted 2 droughts and 1 ice storm. She was not panicking. She had never planned to panic. Panic was for people who had not prepared. From inside the house, she could hear Chloe on her phone. The tone was brisk and confident, directions being given, arrangements being confirmed, the transport van, the locksmith, possibly the police. Chloe was efficient. Martha had always acknowledged that. Efficiency without knowledge is simply speed in the wrong direction. Martha looked down at the envelope. The wax seal was unbroken. The stamp was precise, institutional, and deeply pressed. It matched exactly one other seal in existence, the one in Arthur Pendelton's office safe. She had not called him yet. She did not need to. He had been notified the moment she retrieved the document from beneath the rose cane. The arrangement had been in place for 3 years. A specific action, a specific document, a specific signal. Arthur knew what it meant. He would already be moving. The question was timing. Martha looked at her watch again. The second hand moved, steady, quiet, and exact. She stepped willingly to the edge of the porch, stopped at the top step, and looked back at the open door. She had warned Chloe. She had done it clearly, specifically, and with complete composure. That mattered. Not emotionally, legally. The locks were about to change. Martha knew that. She had known it before Chloe made the call, but locks, she also knew, were not the only thing changing today. The locksmith's van turned into the driveway at 12 minutes past 2. Martha heard it before she saw it. The engine was a working vehicle's engine, practical, loud, and unhurried. It rolled to a stop behind the row of black bags Chloe had already dragged to the porch edge. The man who stepped out was broad-shouldered, mid-40s, and dressed in a gray work shirt with a company patch on the chest. He carried a canvas tool bag. He moved the way people move when they have done a job 10,000 times. Efficient, quiet, and without performance. He looked at Martha first, then at the bags, then at the front door. "Locksmith," Chloe called from inside. Her heels struck the hardwood in sharp, even intervals as she crossed the foyer. She appeared in the doorway, phone in one hand, the folded power of attorney in the other. "Right on time. Come in." The locksmith nodded. He moved toward the door. He passed Martha on the porch without comment, but he glanced at her, briefly, carefully, and without looking away too quickly. Martha met his eyes. She said nothing. She held the envelope. He went inside. Chloe met him in the foyer with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed the sequence. She pointed to the front deadbolt, the interior chain lock, and the side entry door at the end of the hallway. She spoke quickly, clearly, and with the bright authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed by contractors. "All 3, she said. "New hardware throughout. I want the old cores pulled and replaced, not rekeyed. I want the old keys to be completely void." She handed him a printed specification sheet. "I've selected the replacements already. They're in a box on the entry table." The locksmith took the sheet. He looked at it. He folded it once and tucked it into his shirt pocket. He set his canvas bag down beside the entry table and knelt to examine the front deadbolt. Martha could see him from the porch. The door was still open. She watched him run his fingers along the edge of the door frame. His touch was slow, deliberate, and precise. Then he stopped. His hand stilled at a point about 18 inches above the lock housing. His fingers pressed lightly against the wood. He leaned in. He looked at something in the grain of the door frame. Something carved there. Something small and deep and old. He stayed very still for a moment. Chloe was already on her phone again. She had moved to the far end of the foyer, her back to the locksmith, her voice low and decisive. Martha watched his hands. He had not opened his tool bag. From inside the house, faintly at first, and then with gathering clarity, came the sound of Chloe's second call. Her tone had sharpened. The words came through in pieces. "Yes, she's still on the porch. She's refusing to leave voluntarily." A pause. "I understand. How soon can you send someone?" Martha turned her face toward the garden. The east rose bed was still visible from the porch steps. The canes stood straight in the afternoon light, tied and tended and patient. Behind her, the click of Chloe's heels crossed back toward the foyer. "The police are on their way," Chloe announced. She was addressing Martha now. She raised her voice just enough to carry through the open door. "I've reported a trespassing situation. Non-cooperative. I suggest you sit down and wait calmly so this doesn't become more difficult than it needs to be." Martha turned to face her. "I am standing on the porch of my home," she said. Her voice was flat and precise. "I am not trespassing." Chloe tilted her head. The smile returned, patient, practiced, and poisonous. "Legally," she said, "that determination has already been made. The power of attorney grants me full residential authority. You have been asked to vacate. You have refused. That meets the statutory definition." She glanced at the locksmith. "Please proceed." The locksmith stood slowly. He picked up his canvas bag. He unzipped the top compartment and looked inside it for a moment without reaching in. Then he looked at the door frame again. "Ma'am," he said. He was addressing Chloe. His voice was careful, neutral, and measured. "Can I ask you something before I start?" Chloe turned toward him with the expression of someone willing to allow one question. "Is this property part of an estate holding?" he asked. Any kind of trust arrangement or similar. Chloe's expression did not change, but something behind it did, a small, involuntary tightening at the corners of her eyes. "That's not relevant to what I've hired you for," she said. "It might be," he said. He kept his voice even. He was not challenging her. He was stating something he believed to be practically true. There are certain seal markings on estate properties that indicate legal encumbrances. If a property is held in trust, changes to structural hardware can sometimes trigger. "I have a valid power of attorney," Chloe said. Her voice had gone cool. "I have retained you for a service. I would appreciate it if you would perform it." The locksmith looked at the door frame one more time. His jaw moved slightly, a decision being made behind a neutral face. Then he reached into the bag and withdrew the drill. The sound it made when it bit into the brass housing of the deadbolt was violent, metallic, shrieking, and wrong. It tore through the quiet afternoon the way nothing else on the street was moving. The neighbors' houses sat still in the heat. The elm trees stood without wind, and the drill screamed against the vintage brass of a door that had stood unchanged for 40 years. Martha did not flinch. She stood at the top of the porch steps and looked directly at the brass housing as the drill found its edge. Chips of brass scattered across the entry tile. One landed near her shoe. She looked down at it, a small, bright fragment, warm from the friction. The original lock had been installed the week they moved in. Her husband had chosen it himself. He had held it up in the hardware store and said it would outlast both of them. He had been right about that. Until now. Chloe watched from the hallway arch. Her arms were folded. Her phone was in her hand. She looked exactly like someone who had won. The drill paused. The locksmith pulled it back. He set it down beside the canvas bag and reached in for a flat extraction tool. He worked the old housing loose from the door. It came free with a dull, final clunk. He held it for a moment. Martha watched his hands. His fingers moved across the back of the old housing, tracing something there. Something she recognized, something Chloe had never thought to look for. The crest was small, stamped into the rear plate of the original lock housing. Circular, detailed, and completely proprietary. It matched the seal on the door frame exactly. Both were original. Both were documented. Both were part of the estate record filed in 1987. The locksmith set the old housing down very carefully on the entry table. He did not reach for the replacement hardware in the box Chloe had prepared. He reached instead for the cracked phone in his shirt pocket. Chloe noticed. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Checking something," he said. He kept his eyes on the phone. "I need you to continue," she said. "The police will be here shortly. I need the locks changed before they arrive, so the situation is I understand," he said. He was already dialing. Chloe stared at him. The smile was gone. In its place was something harder, flatter, and less controlled. Martha stood on the porch in the full sun. The heat pressed down, relentless, enormous, and still. She did not sit. She did not pace. She held the envelope, and she waited. The drill had pierced the brass. The old lock was gone. Something about that should have felt like a defeat. It did not, because Martha understood what Chloe did not. The lock on a door is not the same as the right to the door. Somewhere across the neighborhood, a siren began, faint, distant, and growing. And in the driveway behind the service van, a cracked phone screen pressed against a calloused ear. A quiet, urgent voice spoke to a dispatcher who was not the police. A completely different mechanism was snapping into place.
Absolutely not. She actually called the police on an old woman for standing on her own front porch. If that were me, I would have lost my mind the second she touched those rose bushes. Imagine standing there silently while someone drills through the lock of your family home. The audacity is real.
The locksmith moved fast. He cleared the porch steps in 2 strides and rounded the front corner of his van before Chloe could follow. He kept his body low and his voice lower. The van blocked the sight line from the front door. He pressed his back against the warm metal panel and looked at the number on his phone screen. He had written it in pen on the inside cover of his work log 3 years ago. A senior partner at an estate firm downtown had handed him a card during a job on the east side. A property dispute. A different family. A similar seal. If you ever see this crest on a residential property, the attorney had said, and something feels wrong, you call me directly, not the county clerk, not the police, me. The locksmith had thought it was unusual. He had kept the card anyway. He was a practical man. Practical men keep unusual things. He dialed. The cicadas were loud in the heat. Their sound rose and fell in slow rhythmic waves across the elm trees lining the property. It was the kind of sound that filled silence without breaking it. It covered the creak of the porch behind him, covered Chloe's heels on the hardwood inside, covered everything underneath it with a low, persistent hum. The phone rang once. Twice. Pendleton Law, a voice answered, female composed and immediate. I need Arthur Pendelton, the locksmith said. Directly. It's urgent. May I ask who's calling? My name is Ray Kowalski. I'm a licensed locksmith. I'm currently on site at a residential property. He paused. He looked down at the estate crest he had photographed on his cracked screen. I've identified a proprietary blind trust seal on the door hardware and the frame. It matches the Pendleton crest. Another pause. There is a woman being removed from the property by force. She's elderly. She's calm. She's holding a sealed envelope with the same stamp. A brief silence on the line, not hesitation, processing. Hold, please. The hold lasted 11 seconds. Ray counted them. He watched the front corner of the van. No movement from the porch. Chloe was still inside. This is Arthur Pendelton. The voice was deep, unhurried, and completely alert. The voice of a man who had been expecting a call and had been hoping it would not be necessary. Mr. Pendleton, Ray said. I'm at a property on Sycamore Glen. I was hired to replace the door hardware, standard job. But the frame has your firm's estate seal, and the lock housing has the matching proprietary crest on the rear plate. He kept his voice flat and factual. The woman being removed, she's standing on the front porch. She hasn't raised her voice once. She's holding a manila envelope with a wax stamp that matches the crest exactly. A pause. Describe the seal, Arthur said. Ray described it. Circular, detailed. A specific arrangement of elements he had only seen twice in 20 years of residential work. He described the placement on the frame. He described the rear plate marking on the old housing which was now sitting on the entry table inside. The woman, Arthur said. Gray cardigan, soil on her hands. It was not a question. Yes, Ray said. Is she injured? Not yet. But there's a woman inside with a power of attorney who has called the police. They're en route. Ray pressed the phone harder against his ear. The cicadas surged briefly and then fell back. I stopped drilling before I seated the new hardware. The old core is out, but nothing new is in yet. The door is essentially unlatched right now. Good. Arthur's voice had changed. not louder, denser, the voice of someone shifting from waiting to moving. Do not install the new hardware. Do not leave the property. Do not engage the woman with the power of attorney directly. Understood. Tell the primary shareholder, Arthur said, and his voice carried something that was not quite urgency and not quite relief, but sat precisely between them, that I am already in the car. Ray lowered the phone. He looked at the screen for a moment, then he put it back in his shirt pocket and stood still behind the van. The primary shareholder. That was what Arthur had called her. Not the resident, not the elderly woman, the primary shareholder. Ray had changed locks on a lot of houses. He had worked foreclosures, divorces, estate sales, and evictions. He had seen people removed from properties for reasons that ranged from legitimate to devastating. He had learned over 2 decades to read the room quickly and to keep his opinions to himself. But this was the first time he had ever heard a locksmith described as the person who had saved a situation. He straightened up. He walked back around the front of the van and up the porch steps. He picked up his canvas bag from the entry table without making eye contact with Chloe. He set the old brass housing carefully into a side pocket of the bag. Chloe watched him from the hallway arch. "Are you finished?" she asked. The word finished had a specific weight. She wanted the locks changed. She wanted it done before the sirens arrived. "Not yet," Ray said. He looked at the open door housing. He looked at the frame. He pulled out his work log and made a note. Slow, deliberate, and unhurried. "What does that mean?" Chloe asked. Her voice had sharpened. "I hired you to do a job. The job is not complicated. It is 3 locks. It is 30 minutes of work." "What exactly are you writing site notes?" Ray said. "Standard procedure. I don't need site notes. I need the locks changed." Ray looked up at her. His expression was neutral, professional, and completely unreadable. "There are certain procedural steps I have to complete before seating new hardware on a property with estate markings," he said. "It's a liability issue. For me, not for you." Chloe stared at him. "That is not a real thing," she said. "It is," Ray said. He looked back at his log. Chloe's phone buzzed in her hand. She looked at the screen. She pressed it to her ear. "Yes," she said. Her voice shifted immediately into its command register. "Yes, I understand. How far out?" A pause. "Fine. Come to the front." The woman is on the porch. She is not cooperative. She lowered the phone. She looked at Ray. Then she looked through the open door at Martha, standing at the top of the porch steps with the envelope against her chest. "The officers will be here in 4 minutes," Chloe said. She was addressing Martha now. Her voice carried easily through the open door. "I want you to understand that I did not want it to come to this. This is a consequence of your own refusal to accept the situation gracefully." Martha did not turn around. The cicadas rose again, long, layered, and persistent. Underneath them, from somewhere down the block, the first edge of a siren became audible. Still distant, still faint, but real now, and growing. Ray stood in the doorway with his canvas bag. He looked at Martha's back. He looked at the envelope she was holding. He looked at the wax seal visible from where he stood, pressed into the flap of the envelope with the same circular, detailed crest he had first traced with his fingertip on the doorframe 30 minutes ago. He thought about the word Arthur Pendelton had used, primary shareholder. He thought about the pristine smartphone Chloe was holding and the cracked screen he had just used to make the most important call of his professional life. He thought about the greasy callus on his right index finger from 20 years of drill triggers and the manicured nail on Chloe's right hand and the 11 seconds of hold music that had separated this situation from a very different outcome. He had not dialed 911. He had dialed a number that carried something heavier, quieter, and infinitely more powerful than emergency services. He had dialed the number that held the deed. From down the street, the siren grew, steady, approaching, and certain. And from the opposite direction, still too far to hear, but already moving, an engine turned over, heavy, refined, and expensive. A black town car pulled away from a parking garage downtown. The driver already had the address. Arthur Pendelton was already in the back seat, already reading the trust document he had kept in his briefcase for 3 years, waiting for exactly this moment. Ray looked at his phone one more time. Then he put it away. He had not drilled the new hardware. He had not completed the job. By any standard measure of his work, he had failed the task he had been hired to perform. He had never felt better about an incomplete job in his life. The siren was close now. Not distant anymore, not a suggestion. It was real sharp and specific. It was coming for this address. Martha heard it from the driveway. Chloe had moved her off the porch step 3 minutes ago. Not with her hands, not yet, with words first. Precise, legal, and delivered with the calm authority of someone who had rehearsed them. "You are not permitted to remain on the structure," Chloe had said. She had gestured toward the driveway with 2 fingers. "The porch is part of the residential footprint. You need to be on the public side property line." Martha had looked at her. "The driveway," Chloe had said. Now, Martha had moved. Not because Chloe had the right to move her, because choosing your ground matters, and the ground Martha had chosen was not the porch. She stood now at the edge of the driveway near the elm trees with the envelope in both hands. The concrete was hot beneath her shoes. The afternoon sun had found its most aggressive angle direct overhead and without shadow. The gardening cardigan held the heat against her shoulders. She did not remove it. Ray stood near his van. He had not left. He was doing something with his tool bag slowly, with great attention to detail, in the manner of a man who had decided that the job was not finished and therefore he was not required to go anywhere. From the front door, Chloe watched them both. Her phone was in her hand. Her posture was perfect. She looked like a woman presiding over an outcome she had designed. Martha looked down at the envelope. The question came quietly. It did not announce itself. It simply arrived the way doubt always does, without invitation and at the worst possible moment. Was the trust strong enough? She had signed it in 1987. Arthur had drawn it up himself. Irrevocable, comprehensive, built specifically to prevent exactly this kind of seizure. She had read it so many times she could recite the operative clauses from memory. She had updated it twice. She had kept the document current, the fees paid, the trustee designation active. But paper is paper. And Chloe was standing in the doorway of the house with a notarized power of attorney and a police cruiser 2 blocks away. And Martha was standing on hot concrete in a soil-stained cardigan, alone with no identification on her person, holding an envelope that no one here had yet been given cause to open. Does paper matter when physical force is shoving you toward the pavement? She had thought about this. She had planned for this. She had been methodical, specific, and careful for 37 years. But planning and living through the plan are not the same experience. Standing inside the moment, with the siren growing and the sun pressing down and the rose beds visible at the edge of her vision, she felt the weight of the gap between them. Had she waited too long? She had delayed calling Arthur directly. She had wanted Chloe to move first, to act first, to establish the harassment on record before the legal response was triggered. That was the strategy. Document the action. Let the clause activate cleanly. Give the trust instrument every advantage in any subsequent proceeding. But strategy assumes time. And time was now the siren sound filling the street. Chloe descended the porch steps. She moved with purpose, steady and direct. Her heels found the concrete without hesitation. She crossed toward Martha with the folded power of attorney held loosely at her side, a prop she no longer needed to brandish because she believed the police were about to do the brandishing for her. "I want to be very clear with you," Chloe said. She stopped 4 feet from Martha. Her voice was low now, almost conversational, almost kind. "When the officers arrive, I need you to cooperate fully. If you resist or if you make any kind of legal claim in the moment, it will only delay the process and embarrass you further." She tilted her head. "There is no version of this where you stay in that house today. I need you to understand that." Martha looked at her. "I understand more than you think," Martha said. "Then act like it," Chloe said. She took 1 step closer, and then her hand came up. It was not a strike. It was a shove. Open palm flat against Martha's shoulder, sharp, sudden, and hard. The kind of contact that is designed to be explained away. A gesture, a redirect. Nothing that would photograph badly. Martha stumbled. Her left foot caught the edge of a driveway seam and she went down. Not completely. Not gracefully. Her right knee hit the concrete first and her palms came down after scraping across the hot, rough surface of the driveway with a sharp, burning sting. The envelope skittered forward. She grabbed it before it cleared her reach, both hands closing around it on instinct, pressing it flat against the concrete beneath her. The gravel in the driveway surface bit into her palms. The sting was immediate, specific, and real. She felt it the way you feel something that you know will matter later, not just as pain, as evidence. Ray took 2 steps forward from the van. He stopped. His hands were open at his sides. Chloe straightened her dress, one smooth, automatic gesture. Then she looked at Martha on the ground and said nothing. Nothing at all. Martha breathed. She looked at her palms. Both scraped, both reddened, the left one beginning to bleed in a thin line across the heel of the hand. She looked at the envelope. The wax seal was intact. She pressed it against her chest and began to push herself upright. Her knee ached. The cardigan had torn at the right elbow. She noticed these things the way you inventory damage. Systematically, without panic. She was upright. She was standing. She was still holding the envelope. Chloe turned toward the street. The police cruiser was visible now. It was turning off the main road, moving slowly with the siren cutting off mid-note as it made the corner. The light stayed on. Blue and red, rolling and silent, bouncing off the polished windows of the neighboring houses with a rhythm that felt both official and theatrical. The light caught Chloe's dress and fractured across it. It caught the windows of the elm-shaded homes across the street. It found the brass of the empty door housing on the entry table inside visible through the open front door. It found Martha's scraped palms. Martha looked at the cruiser. Then she looked at the street beyond it. She was completely alone on the concrete. She was bleeding. She had no identification. She had an envelope with a wax seal that meant nothing to a patrol officer responding to a trespassing call. She had the name of an attorney who was somewhere between downtown and here in a car she could not yet see moving at a speed she could not verify. The cruiser rolled to a stop at the curb. The officer in the passenger seat was already opening his door. And then from the far end of the street, from the direction away from the precinct, away from the main road, something else became audible. Not a siren, not a voice, not the cicadas. An engine, heavy, refined, expensive. A V8 turning at full draw on an open stretch of residential road. The sound of it was enormous, low, and completely out of place in this quiet neighborhood. It did not slow as it rounded the far corner. It grew louder. It came with speed and intention and a specific kind of authority that has nothing to do with sirens and everything to do with purpose. Martha heard it. She did not turn toward it yet. She stood with her scraped palms and her torn cardigan and her sealed envelope, and she waited for one more second. Just one. Then she turned. The black town car crested the elm-shaded rise at the far end of Sycamore Glen. It was moving fast, not recklessly, precisely. The way a thing moves when the person inside it knows exactly where it is going and exactly what it will do when it gets there. Martha exhaled. It was the first full breath she had taken since her palms hit the concrete. She was not alone on the driveway anymore. The isolation, complete and heavy and suffocating just one moment ago, was already lifting. Not because the car had arrived, because she knew who was in it, and she knew what he was carrying. The Blacktown car did not slow at the curb. It came in hard and fast, cutting a sharp angle across the front of the police cruiser and stopped with 2 wheels on the driveway apron and 2 on the street. The engine cut. The door opened. Arthur Pendelton stepped out. He was tall 70 and dressed in a dark charcoal suit that had never in its life been confused with anything casual. His white shirt was without a wrinkle. His tie was a deep institutional navy. He carried a leather briefcase in his left hand and a manila folder in his right, and he moved with the unhurried, absolute certainty of a man who had never once in 40 years of practice needed to raise his voice to be heard. He did not look at Chloe. He walked directly to Martha. He stopped in front of her, looked at her scraped palms, looked at the torn elbow of her cardigan, and looked at her face. His expression did not perform sympathy. It recorded information. Then he reached into his breast pocket and produced a folded white handkerchief. He held it out. Martha took it. She pressed it against the heel of her left hand without looking away from him. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. His voice was quiet, formal, and warm in the specific way that competence is warm. "I apologize for the delay. You're here," she said. "That's sufficient." He nodded once. Then he turned. He turned the way a building turns, the whole weight of him slow, deliberate, and immovable. He faced the driveway, the porch, the open door, and Chloe standing in front of it, and he addressed none of it casually. He addressed it the way you address a legal situation, which is to say he addressed it precisely. The two officers had stepped out of the cruiser. They stood at the edge of the driveway, hands at their sides, reading the scene. The younger one had his notepad out. The older one was watching Arthur with the expression of a man who had just recalculated something. Arthur looked at the older officer. "Good afternoon," he said. He produced a card from his breast pocket and held it out. "Arthur Pendelton, Senior Partner, Pendelton Estate Law. I represent the primary trustee and sole shareholder of this property." He let that settle for exactly 1 second. "This eviction is unlawful. The individual who called you does not hold residential authority over this address." The older officer took the card. He looked at it. He looked at Arthur. "We received a trespassing complaint," he said. "I understand," Arthur said. "The complaint was filed by a secondary beneficiary acting outside the scope of her authorization. The property is held in an irrevocable blind trust dated 1987. The trustee is Mrs. Martha Calloway." He turned slightly and indicated Martha with one open hand. "She is standing in front of you." Chloe came forward. She moved fast, her heels sharp against the concrete, her power of attorney already extended in front of her. "I have a notarized power of attorney," she said. Her voice was controlled, direct, and absolutely certain. "Filed with the county clerk 11 days ago. It grants me full residential and asset authority on behalf of my husband, David Calloway, who is the named beneficiary of this estate." Arthur looked at the document. He did not take it. He looked at it the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray taken by someone who has never attended medical school. "Beneficiary," he said, "not trustee." He opened the manila folder in his right hand and produced a document printed on heavy, watermarked legal parchment. It caught the afternoon light with a quiet luminosity that the photocopied power of attorney beside it could not match. A power of attorney granted by a beneficiary conveys only the rights the beneficiary himself possesses. David Calloway possesses the right to receive distributions as defined by the trust instrument. He turned the page. He does not possess residential authority. He does not possess the right to alter trust assets. He does not possess the right to appoint agents to act on behalf of the trust. He looked at Chloe. "Therefore, neither do you." Chloe stared at him. "That," she said, "is an interpretation." "It is a citation," Arthur said. He turned the document toward her and indicated a specific clause with one finger. "Section 12, paragraph 3 of the 1987 trust instrument, reproduced here in certified copy." He turned to the next page. "Supported here by a 2019 appellate ruling in a materially identical case, and confirmed here," he turned one more page, "by a declaratory judgment we obtained from the county probate court at 9:47 this morning." Silence. Not the silence of a pause. The silence of a room after a door closes. Complete, weighted, and final. The older officer looked at his partner. The younger one had stopped writing. Chloe's mouth opened. Then it closed. She looked at the documents in Arthur's hand. Her eyes moved across them quickly, the way eyes move when they are searching for an exit. She did not find one. "This morning," she said. The words came out smaller than she intended. "At 9:47, Arthur confirmed. He said it without satisfaction. He said it the way you state a time of day, as a fact. He reached into the briefcase. He produced a second document. This one was sealed. The seal on the envelope was circular, detailed, and precisely rendered. It was identical in every particular to the seal on the envelope Martha was holding against her chest. The older officer looked at both envelopes. His eyes moved between them. He said nothing. Arthur broke the seal on his envelope. He removed the document inside. He held it up. "This is the master deed," he said. He addressed the officers directly, now clearly and without theater. The property at this address was conveyed to the Callaway Irrevocable Blind Trust in 1987. The trust has been continuously maintained. The trustee designation has never changed. He looked at the document. Mrs. Martha Callaway is and has always been the sole trustee and primary shareholder of this trust. He lowered the document slightly. She is also the sole shareholder of Callaway Holdings, which encompasses the company and its subsidiary assets, of which her son David is an employee, not an owner. Ray, standing beside his van, went completely still. Chloe's face moved through several things in quick succession. Disbelief first, then calculation. Then something that was not quite fear but lived in the same neighborhood. "David," she said. The name came out like a lifeline. "David has controlling interest, he told me himself." He showed you a certificate of distributions," Arthur said. "He was not unkind. He was not cruel. He was precise in the way that precision at certain moments is its own form of devastating. It documents his right to receive income from the trust. It does not document ownership." He looked at her steadily. Mrs. Callaway retained full ownership at the time of her husband's passing in 2011. She retained it when David joined the company in 2014. She retained it when you and David married in 2018. A pause. "She retained it this morning when you packed her belongings into garbage bags." Chloe said nothing. Arthur turned to the older officer. "I am formally requesting that the trespassing complaint be voided," he said. "The individual who filed it does not have standing. The individual being evicted is in fact the property owner." He produced one final document from the briefcase. "This is the formal notice of trust enforcement and dissolution of derivative benefits under Clause 4B of the trust instrument. I will need you to witness the service." The officer looked at the document. He looked at his partner. He nodded. Arthur turned to Chloe. He held out the notice. She did not take it. He set it on top of the power of attorney she was still holding. It covered her document entirely. "Clause 4B," he said, "mandates immediate forfeiture of all derivative benefits upon documented elder harassment. The events of this afternoon have been recorded, witnessed, and will be filed." He looked at her scraped palms, still wrapped in his handkerchief, and then back at Chloe. "The clause is self-executing. It does not require a court order. It does not require your consent. It does not require your signature." He closed the briefcase. "It is already activated." Chloe looked at the document on top of her power of attorney. She read the first line. Then she read it again. She looked up at Arthur. "What does this mean?" she asked. Her voice had lost its register. It was flat now, thin, and unsteady. "It means," Arthur said, "that every benefit you derived from this trust residential access financial distributions use of trust assets. Access to company accounts is rescinded as of today at the moment the first documented act of harassment occurred." He held her gaze. "Which, based on the timestamps I have, was this morning at approximately 7:14 when you placed the first garbage bag in the foyer." The smirk was gone from Chloe's face. Not fading, gone, replaced by something she had never needed to wear before in her adult life. The expression of someone who has just learned that the floor they were standing on was not a floor. Martha stepped forward. She held the envelope out to Arthur. He took it. He broke the seal, removed the interior document, and compared it to the master deed. The seals matched. The document numbers aligned. He nodded once, satisfied and precise. Then he held the master deed aloft and read the operative clause aloud. His voice carried across the driveway, over the elm trees, through the afternoon heat, past the police cruiser and the service van and the row of black garbage bags on the porch. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the kind of voice that does not require volume because it is carrying something that is already, in every legal sense, absolute. Ray listened from beside the van. He had his work log open. He did not appear to be writing anything. He appeared to be someone who needed a moment to understand what he had just been part of. When Arthur finished reading, he lowered the document. He looked at Chloe. He did not ask for a response. He did not invite a rebuttal. He did not perform the moment. He simply looked at her the way a legal fact looks at the person it has just made irrelevant. And Chloe, for the first time since Martha had known her, had absolutely nothing to say. Arthur set the briefcase down on the hood of the town car. He opened it with both latches clean and simultaneous and laid the master deed flat across the top. He produced a pen from his breast pocket. He set the declaratory judgment beside it, then the trust enforcement notice, then the Clause 4B documentation, each one overlapping the last in a precise, deliberate row. He worked without hurry, without theater. The way a man works when he knows that the work itself is the statement. The older officer stood at the edge of the driveway with both documents in his hand, the voided power of attorney and the witness service notice, reading them with the careful line-by-line attention of someone who understood that he was going to be asked about this later. The younger one had put his notepad away. He was simply watching now. Ray had not moved from beside the van. He stood with his canvas bag at his feet and his arms at his sides, and the expression of a man who had come to change 3 locks and had ended up somewhere considerably larger than that. Chloe stood on the porch steps. She had retreated there without appearing to retreat. Small movements, a step back, a turn of the shoulder, a shift of weight. She was still holding the Clause 4B notice. She had not put it down. She had not read past the first paragraph. She was looking at Arthur with the expression of someone waiting for the moment to reverse itself. It did not reverse itself. Arthur looked up from the briefcase. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "I need to walk you through the full scope of the dissolution so you have a complete picture." Martha stood beside him at the hood of the car. She had returned the handkerchief. Her palms were still scraped, but she held them at her sides without favoring them. She looked at the documents laid out across the briefcase and nodded once. "The house," Arthur said. He indicated the property with one open hand. "Held in the Calloway Irrevocable Blind Trust since 1987. Never transferred, never subdivided, never subject to marital property consideration because it predates the marriage by 19 years and was explicitly excluded from any community property designation in the trust instrument itself." He turned the master deed so she could see the relevant clause. "It is yours. It has always been yours. Nothing that occurred today altered that in any legal sense." "I know," Martha said. "I want it on record that you know," Arthur said, "for the filing." She nodded again. "The company," he said. He produced a third document from the briefcase, a corporate structure summary, single-spaced 4 pages. Calloway Holdings, including the primary operating company and its 3 subsidiaries, is held entirely within the trust. David holds a distribution right equivalent to 31% of annual net income. He holds no equity. He holds no voting shares. He holds no governance authority of any kind. Arthur set the summary down. He is in the precise legal sense of the term an income beneficiary, not an owner. Chloe made a sound. It was small, involuntary, and quickly suppressed, but everyone on the driveway heard it. Arthur did not look at her. "Under Clause 4B, he continued, the documented harassment triggers immediate forfeiture of all derivative benefits. That includes David's distribution rights, which are suspended pending a full trust review. It includes residential access for any party deriving benefits through David's beneficiary status." He paused. "That means this property, effective immediately." Now he looked at Chloe. "It also means," he said, "the secondary residence on Birchwood, the vehicle registered to the trust. The company accounts to which you have had access as a spousal extension of David's beneficiary status. He held her gaze. All of it is frozen as of 7:14 this morning. Chloe's face had gone a color that was difficult to describe. Not pale, not flushed. Something between them that had no good name but was recognizable as the color of a person who has just understood fully and without remaining exit that everything they believed they were standing on has been removed from beneath them. "You can't," she said. Her voice was thin and specific in the way that voices get when the thing they are saying is not a legal argument but a personal plea wearing the clothing of one. David is a beneficiary. He has rights. He has a right to contest this. You cannot dissolve 31% of a company's distributions without. The trust is irrevocable, Arthur said. David's rights within it are defined by its terms, not renegotiated by his preferences. Clause 4B is not a penalty provision subject to appeal. It is a structural safeguard built into the original instrument. He looked at her with the same steady, unhurried precision he had used for every sentence since he stepped out of the car. David was informed of Clause 4B when he accepted his beneficiary designation in 2014. He signed an acknowledgement. "I have it here." He did not produce it. He did not need to. The information alone was sufficient. Chloe looked at Martha. It was the first time Martha realized that Chloe had looked at her directly since Arthur had arrived. Not through her, not past her, at her. And what was in that look was not rage and not contempt. It was something Martha recognized from a long career of watching people arrive at the limits of their own assumptions. It was the look of someone who had genuinely not known. Martha returned the look. She held it steadily without cruelty and without softness. "I told you," Martha said, "on the porch. I told you about Clause 4B. I told you I wanted it on record that I had told you." Chloe said nothing. "You called it senile rambling," Martha said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "I want you to have the full memory of this moment. I want you to remember that you were warned clearly and specifically, and you laughed. The silence that followed was not empty. It was dense, weighted, and utterly without escape." Arthur closed the briefcase. He looked at Chloe with the expression of a man completing a professional obligation. "You will need to vacate the premises," he said, "today. The trust enforcement notice gives you until 6 this evening to remove your personal belongings from this property and from the Birchwood residence where a colleague of mine is currently serving the companion notice." He paused. "I would suggest using the time efficiently." Chloe looked at the porch. She looked at the row of black garbage bags lined along the porch edge, bulging and knotted and cheap. She had arranged them herself with her own hands an hour ago. She had carried them to the door herself. She had lined them up herself with the specific satisfaction of someone disposing of something they considered beneath them. She looked at them for a long moment. Arthur reached into the briefcase one final time and produced a roll of heavy black garbage bags. He set them on the hood of the car beside the documents. He did not comment on them. He did not need to. Chloe looked at the roll of bags. She looked at the porch. She looked at Martha. Martha looked back at her. Something moved across Chloe's face. Something large, private, and devastating. It moved through quickly the way things move when a person still has enough self-possession to not let them stay. Then it was gone, and what was left was a face that was simply quietly and completely undone. She reached out and picked up the roll of bags. She went inside. The sounds that followed were familiar. They were the sounds of objects being lifted, moved, and placed into bags. They were the sounds of drawers opening and closing, of heels on hardwood, of silk against door frames. The same sounds that had filled the house an hour ago, but reversed now, moving in the opposite direction, carrying different things. Martha stood in the driveway and listened. Ray stood beside his van. He looked at Arthur. "The hardware," he said. He meant the old brass lock housing sitting in his canvas bag. "Evidence of the original estate configuration," Arthur said without looking up from the filing he was completing. I'll need it for the record. Ray unzipped the side pocket of his bag and produced the old brass housing. He held it out. Arthur took it and placed it carefully in the briefcase beside the documents. "Thank you," Arthur said. He looked at Ray directly. "What you did today was not a small thing." Ray looked at the ground, then at the house, then at his cracked phone screen. "I just made a phone call," he said. "Yes," Arthur said. "You did." The front door opened. Chloe appeared in the doorway. She was carrying 2 bags. Her silk dress caught the late afternoon light. Her hair was still perfect. Her posture was still composed. She had gathered these things around her the way people gather the last things they have left. She carried the bags down the porch steps without looking at Martha. She crossed the driveway and set them beside the town car. She went back inside. She made 4 trips. On the last trip, she stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She stood there for a moment with the final bag in her hand. The matching luggage, pristine and designer and expensive, was already loaded into the car she had called while she was inside. It sat at the curb, waiting silent and running. She looked at Martha. "He'll fight this," she said. Her voice was quiet and stripped of everything it had been carrying all afternoon. "David will fight this. Martha considered this." She looked at Chloe for a long, steady moment. "He is welcome to review the trust instrument," Martha said. "Arthur's office is downtown. The hours are posted on the door." Chloe held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then she picked up the last bag and walked down the driveway without looking back. She reached the waiting car. She put the bag in the trunk. She got in. The car pulled away from the curb. The street went quiet. The cicadas filled it immediately, layered and patient and completely indifferent to what had just occurred. The elm trees stood in their long afternoon shadows. The police cruiser remained at the curb. The older officer was completing his report. The younger one was looking at the house with the expression of someone who had taken up a new and consuming interest in estate law. Martha looked at the porch. The black garbage bags were still there. 7 of them lined along the edge, knotted and full. Her belongings packed without care, without ceremony, and without the faintest acknowledgement of what they represented. She looked at Arthur. "I'll have someone here in the morning," he said, "to assist with the unpacking." "That's not necessary," Martha said. "No," he said, "but it's offered." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. Not acceptance. Acknowledgement. There is a difference, and Arthur had always known how to hear it. He picked up his briefcase. He looked at the house, solid and still in the late sun, and he nodded once to himself with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has done the work he was built to do. He got in the town car. Ray repacked his canvas bag. He zipped it closed. He looked at the empty door housing at the open lock cavity in the front door where the old hardware had been. "You'll want that reseated," he said. "Properly. I can come back tomorrow. I'll bring a matching replacement. Same era, if I can find it." Martha looked at the door. "Same era," she said. "Yes." Ray nodded. He picked up his bag and walked to his van. He started the engine. He backed out of the driveway slowly, carefully, in the manner of a man who has decided that every movement from this point forward deserves a certain amount of consideration. The van turned onto the street and was gone. Martha stood alone in the driveway. She stood there for a moment in the late afternoon quiet in her torn cardigan and her worn gardening shoes with her scraped palms and her sealed envelope now returned to Arthur's briefcase and the whole enormous afternoon settling around her like something finally exhaled. She looked at the east rose bed. The canes were still tied to their stakes. The soil was still fresh where she had turned it that morning. The space beneath the oldest cane was still visible, a small, neat depression in the earth, empty now, the steel box gone, the document retrieved, the trigger pulled. She walked to the porch. She looked at the gardening shears Chloe had kicked toward the door that morning. They had come to rest against the bottom porch step, old and worn and entirely themselves. She picked them up. She turned them over once in her hands. The handles were smooth from decades of use. The blades were still sharp. She had sharpened them herself 2 days ago in the same unhurried way she did everything that mattered. She walked to the east rose bed. She knelt down beside the oldest cane. Her knee ached where it had hit the concrete. She did not favor it. She found her position stable, familiar, and grounded. She looked at the cane, assessed, it found the angle, and began to prune. The shears made their clean, quiet sound. Cut and release. Cut and release. The afternoon light moved across the garden in its slow, indifferent way. The cicadas held their note. The elm trees stood in their roots. Martha pruned her roses. She did not hurry. She did not look back at the house. She did not look at the driveway where the black car had been, or the curb where the police cruiser was completing its report, or the porch where 7 bags of her belongings still waited in the late sun. She tended what was hers, as she always had, as she always would. Cut and release, cut and release. Made up. But that feeling of watching absolute undeniable legal justice crush unearned arrogance. I felt my own blood pressure drop the second those papers were served. How would you have handled being locked out of your own home? Drop a comment. Like, share, subscribe.